In my opinion, it kind of all boils down to the golden rule. Treat people how you want to be treated. Yes, it's a business. Yes, it's a company. Most of us are there to make money and grow the company. But at the end of the day, people are people. People are your greatest asset, and treat them how you'd want to be treated.
Welcome to the People Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the People Powered podcast. We are again continuing our Culture Secret Sauce series. What is that even about? We've talked in the initial episodes, we talked a lot about different foundational concepts to a healthy, thriving culture. We talked about communication. We brought in some experts from a communication perspective, from conflict management perspective, from a leadership development perspective. We were bringing in all these experts to have them share with our listeners some very specific tips, tricks, strategies that they could implement immediately to start to improve on those foundation pieces. But what we started to realize early on is a lot of our listeners might think that that doesn't actually operationalize. So we pivoted and shifted our focus, and we scoured the globe to find companies who, when it comes to creating a workplace culture where people feel seen, heard, and valued, they have clearly understood the assignment. Today, we continue our series, and the intent is to help share with you some very specific best practices, tips, tricks, models, things that they have seen, have brought value, and have effectively enabled them to increase the level of engagement within their own workplace cultures. So today we're welcoming Greg Summer of Oddball. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Lori.
So Greg is the COO of Oddball, and he's going to share with us, before we actually jump into the culture chat, we're going to have Greg share with us how Greg got to doing what Greg does today, but also provide us a bit more of an idea of what is Oddball, what kind of services does it offer, and just a bit more about the company itself. Greg, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Oddball is a government contractor. We're based out of Northern Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. We're a service-disabled veteran-owned small business, or in government terms, it's called SDVOSB. We contract, as I said, with the U.S. federal government, and we primarily do agile software development, DevSecOps, data, AI, machine learning, the whole thing. And we are a digital services company. But as for myself, I've been in government contracting for 25 years. It kind of pains me a little bit to say that. Yeah. I've lived in Virginia pretty much my entire life. So being in this space or being in this area, it's largely government related. I started as a SQL developer and kind of worked my way up from there, and took on project management and then program management, VP of operations, and ultimately COO. So progressively larger programs, larger customers, more challenging things. But I've worked with several different agencies, Department of State, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and NASA. So some very interesting things, some very fun things, some very challenging things. But I joined Oddball about 5 years ago when the company was about 30 people. And today we are about 300 people.
Wow.
So tremendous growth in the last 5 years. Very excited about that. And we've done all that through our culture. Our culture is very important to us. I'm really excited to join you today to talk about that, and specifically kind of how our culture has, and we've been able to maintain that culture through that growth.
I love that, because I think where a lot of companies fail is when they are forecasting this rapid growth, they don't take the time to assess the culture. They don't take the time to figure out and build the infrastructure for that culture to essentially be able to weather the storm of a rapid growth, right? And to be able to build the systems that will make sure that they are keeping tabs on how people are feeling amidst this growth, but also that will help them attract that next generation of workers that will, really bring them to the place they need to be able to achieve that growth in the scale that they expect from the company. So that's absolutely, I'm excited to have you share some of that information. Perhaps a starting point, we could go back to, how you went from 30 to 300. We're talking about, was it 35 years ago? And then you're now 300. So let's talk a bit about some of the things that happened that enabled you to grow to 300?
Sure. So some of the things that happened is we obviously won more contracts that allowed us to grow. But it's not just about winning the contracts; you have to deliver on the contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been very successful at doing that through a wide variety of things. But again, it comes back to culture. So when we hire people, we hire specifically for our culture. We've been very deliberate with that. I should probably add here too that we are a fully remote company. So that also adds a very interesting dynamic when it comes to culture. We're based in the DC area, like I said, but I believe at last count, we have people in, I want to say 46 of the 50 states.
46 of the 50 states. So you're literally spread out across the country, 100% virtual.
Correct.
And you initially, when you talked, you said you hire for culture fit, which is really kind of a new concept, I would say. One that I'm, of course, a huge fan of. But if I'm the first rated engineer in the field and I apply at your place, am I automatically getting the job?
That's a great question. So no, you're not automatically getting the job. You can be a fantastic technician, but you may not wind up getting hired here. The first thing we look for is a culture fit. So we have a team that is dedicated to our culture. It's led by my good friend Luke Lambert, does a great job with that. And we hire specific to the first interviews for our culture. And if you don't pass that, you don't move forward. You can be a fantastic technician and it doesn't matter. We've had some people slip through on occasion. We're human, so we're not always perfect, but we're pretty good at it, and we've been very successful at it. We have 5 core values that we really stick to, and we tout them. It's not just how we run the company; it's what we hire and evaluate on. You can find those on our website, but they're client first, big picture, growth oriented, great teams, and own it. And they are instrumental to the company and to our overall success. And so, if you aren't going to live by those core values and execute by those, then you won't move further into the interview process. So like I said, the first thing is a culture interview. Then we do a technical interview following that.
Interesting. So that culture interview, I mean, we've all seen that there are people who are, I would say, career interviewees. They are great at interviews, the same way that there are people who, unfortunately, they don't do well in interviews, but it doesn't translate directly into what they're capable of. It's just they really don't do well under pressure. So I'm curious to know, what if I'm an expert interviewee? How have you structured your questions to really hone in and get a better sense of what their actual, how they really align with those values?
Yeah, it's a great question. You're right. There are some people who are maybe a little bit more experienced at interviews than others. So we will ask for actual examples. What have you done? Give us an example where you've owned something. Give us an example of where you've been a great teammate. We find, and we hear this from our customers, we've asked them before, what do they like about Oddball versus some of the other competitors in our space? Because like everyone, we all have competitors in our space. And one of the things they come back to us with is we say what we're going to do. We do what we say we're going to do, and we deliver on that. And whereas maybe some others, I guess, promise the world but don't deliver on it. We tend to make sure we don't overpromise. We're very deliberate. We are very people-oriented. And the reason we call ourselves Oddball is because we believe that we are great technicians and very technically savvy, but we're also people, if that makes sense. We have personalities, and we like to have a good time. We like to have fun. We don't just like to necessarily sit behind a computer and code all day. Yeah.
But I love that. I love that you recognize, and so I guess the name Oddball is because it's kind of that dichotomy of you're definitely capable of coding and first-rate coding, but also very people-centric. And I love that you ask your clients what they like about your company. I think that continuous improvement feedback is wonderful, and it's necessary to continuously evolve to meet the demand and to meet what their actual needs are out there, right? Okay, so I'm an expert interviewee, but I love that you have them provide specific examples, and I'm assuming it's more of a conversation, not so much a panel. I'm hoping there's a bit of a panel because you want that, take away that potential of bias of having just one individual. But the way that it's happening is more, tell us a bit more about your story, help us understand your story, why you're a fit here, and convince us of that in that process. So Love that you have given some thought to those expert interviewees and make sure that you've structured the interview, that culture fit check, that culture screening, which is so unique in and of itself, but that you've taken the time to structure it in a way that eliminates the potential of someone who is that expert interviewee that just basically feeding you the stories that you need. Having them give specific examples is certainly helpful to start validate whether or not they're a fit. So then they get into the technical interview. What if they're a fit there? Then we're going on to that next step. Tell me a bit more about your onboarding, your orientation process.
Yeah, so our onboarding, once someone is hired and we go to onboard them, they go through a couple hours of onboarding with our HR department, who does a great job of going through various trainings, various government regulations. Obviously, there's all your typical onboarding paperwork to a new company, but we also start telling them about the company and about our culture and things that entails. We give examples of our core values. We spend a lot of time talking about that. We spend time talking about things like Slack. Slack, it sounds simple, but Slack is a huge part of our culture. It's our main communication mechanism. We still do email and things like that, but we spend a lot of time on Slack communicating with each other. And I always tell people we have tons of channels. I think at this point we have more non-work channels than we have work channels. We have, there's a foodies channel, there's a travel channel, there's a workout channel. There's just a channel called random for random things. So again, especially being remote is fantastic. I love being remote, but it does put up some virtual walls. So having that water cooler kind of stuff really helps to break down those walls.
Amazing.
So we spend some time talking about that. And then usually about 2 weeks into their time, once they finish with that, they'll get introduced to their program manager. They'll start onboarding to their actual team, start any onboarding paperwork required for that. Sometimes in the government space, it requires additional paperwork to get cleared through the agency. But about 2 weeks or so, 2 to 3 weeks, I usually meet with everyone who started within that time frame as a COO and have a meeting with them. I actually did one of those today. And I spend a little bit more time talking about government contracting. So a lot of the people we hire are new to that space. I also spend time talking about the company and our culture and some of the things that we do that makes it, we think, unique and fun. Then 2 weeks after that, the CEO, Travis, comes in and meets with them again and spends some time also getting to know them a little bit more and sharing some more about himself and the company. So trying to get them some face time, getting to know them a little bit, and obviously educate them on what we do.
I love it. So I'm going to back up a bit. The reason I asked you to kind of describe that onboarding orientation is that in prior conversations, you had shared some of these practices, and I thought they're really impactful. And they're literally low to no cost, although we recognize that it might not be operationally feasible for the COO to meet every new employee. But if it is, or if there's some way that we can connect them to someone of authority within the company to share the vision of the company, it's all about nurturing that seed of loyalty, helping them understand that the work they do has a bigger purpose and impact, right? And that it's connected to a bigger picture ultimately. Those meetings are how you make that happen. Also, spending 2 weeks literally just acclimatizing, literally just starting to understand and being provided with as much information as possible to expedite that learning curve, to help them truly understand the culture and to get a sense of what they can expect, but also how they fit into that culture, and to help them further confirm that it is indeed where they want to be and something they want to be a part of. Because purpose and impact, I say this all the time, from the moment that you're pitching yourself to those prospective candidates, in the way that you craft your recruitment strategies, is how you start to plant those seeds of loyalty. You're getting them excited to work for you before they even start to work with you. But that seed then needs to be nurtured. Once you're bringing them on, make sure that, I use the analogy of dating apps, of catfishing. Some companies are fabulous at, they've got this dynamite recruitment strategy. They've got all these videos that show the impact their services are having on the world. They have, they showcase all of the different things internally, some team building events, perhaps some different programs and benefits they have available to employees. So the employee's super excited, but then that's where they stop their focus and effort. So when the employee actually starts, their experience within the first 90 days will literally translate to a level of loyalty that will have them sticking around for years to come or have them shopping around immediately, right? So making sure that you're sprinkling these little initiatives, these little practices throughout that 90 days that are setting them up for success, but also that continues to feed that seed of loyalty throughout those days. I've spoke to a number of CEOs who have said that when I've asked them, what's one of the best practices that you've noticed has had a huge impact on people feeling like they're seen by senior leadership, by the company? And one of the things they said was something as easy as learning their children's names or their pets' names, whatever the case may be. Really what that's about is about suddenly that employee thinking, wow, I'm not just a number. They remember my pets' names. Obviously, for 300 employees, the expectation is not that you learn all 300 employees' pet and children's name, but by having that practice of a new employee, and if you can stagger your onboarding, it is somewhat realistic that you have at least some senior leader meet with them more than once, maybe more than one leader, the way that Oddball does it here, to be able to help them feel seen, heard, and valued. And so maybe just as added insight, you were saying you share with them the values, you share with them a bit more about the culture. What are some of the other things that you're trying to gather during those kind of check-in meetings in the very early days of their career?
Yeah, so like you said, we are definitely trying to learn more about them. I always do an icebreaker during my meetings with them. Today's icebreaker was, tell me about your favorite vacation ever. Sometimes I've done that same question, but said childhood vacation. Sometimes around the holidays, they'll say, what was the best present you ever got? Just kind of depends. And those kinds of things help you remember someone. But it's also not just me, because it's not just one-on-one. Like I said, it'll be everyone who's starting that time. So it's an opportunity for them to meet their coworkers too, who they may or may not have a whole lot of daily contact with, depending on what programs they're on.
Okay, so let's add that clarification. So it's not necessarily a one-on-one. To be more operationally feasible, you do a group as a cohort. Right. Everyone who started within a given period of time, that's wonderful. So there you go, folks. There's no reason that can't happen if you're doing it as a group, right? It's one meeting, several people feel seen, heard, and valued.
So we used to do a one-on-one, but as we continued to grow, to your point, that became less feasible. And we struggled with that a little bit. We didn't want to get rid of that personal feel to it, but we also knew it wasn't sustainable. And then taking into account also the value of having those individuals in a room with some of their coworkers, it just made total sense to do it as a larger group. And again, it's not a big group. The size is going to vary depending on how many people start in that time. But I'd say it's usually 5-ish.
Perfect. That's a wonderful number to be able to have some really meaningful conversations with each and every one of them. A great question. You say your icebreaker. It's an icebreaker with a purpose. I like to do icebreaker team building. It always has a purpose. There's a kind of there's value from whatever activity you're conducting. Great question is, when you were a child, what is one of the things that you did that made you lose track of time? Because in that question, you're going to be able to start to gather some of the things they really love. It's some of the elements or maybe even different activities that you're easily going to be able to say, translate to your workplace to say, okay, this person really, really appreciates and enjoys doing this. So when we're able to, let's make sure that we're sending tasks their way, as of course, operationally feasible, that align with that love and that preference, that need. Because it's really about mapping out and taking the time. When we talk about getting to know your team members, what we're actually saying is take the time to understand their needs and preferences, because what your needs and preferences are may actually be polar opposite to what the needs and preferences of one of your team members are. Sure. And if you're projecting your preferences in your approach to leadership, in the way that you guide and support your team members, understand that if you haven't taken the time to understand or to map out their own preferences and needs, then you're likely going to be falling short, and you might in fact be contributing to them feeling demotivated and to them ultimately checking out. So taking the time to understand and truly appreciate what their preferences are is absolutely important. So let's talk about, you've had those 2 meetings, you've taken the time to know them. There's something else you shared with me that you send out to them within the first month, I believe, right?
Usually they get it before they've even started, but definitely within the first week, we send essentially a care package that goes out to them. And that care package has usually a book in it called What the Heck is EOS, which I'll get to in a second. And it has a Oddball hoodie that everyone always seems to love. And sometimes we'll put some stickers and things like that into maybe some other smaller things, but always at least those two things. So EOS is the Entrepreneur Operating System is what it stands for. And it's what we've run the company based on. We didn't come up with this. It's a very well-known thing that's out there. We decided to use it many years ago, and it's been very valuable to us in helping us grow the company and helping us maintain that culture. So that's been valuable. And of course, it's not uncommon for us to get on calls and everyone has their hoodies on or their shirt. We send a t-shirt as well. It's 80 degrees here today, or I'd probably be wearing my hoodie. So
there you go. Yeah. Well, my heat's kicking in here in Northern Ontario. So you know what? I could make use of a hoodie right about now. But what that is about is, again, helping them connect to one another. If they're both wearing their oddball swag, then they feel part of something bigger than themselves. Right? I really like that you've called it a care box, because it's, again, transmitting very early on in their career that we care about our people. We understand that our people are the reason we're able to do what we do. Now I'd like to shift a bit of the conversation, if you're okay with it. We've spent a lot of time and shared quite a number of best practices for new employees. So from the moment that you're actually bringing them in, that the culture screening and how you can effectively develop that as an exercise to measure fit to culture before even having them proceed to that technical interview. And then we talked about the care box they get before they even start. I always emphasize the importance of giving them as much information, or about trying to help them feel connected as early as possible once they've accepted that job offer. That's how you continue to nurture that seed of loyalty and commitment to the organization. We also talked about some best practices in those early days, and to help them feel set up for success, but also to help them truly grasp and understand the workplace culture. I'd like for us to now pivot a bit, where a lot of companies, I talked about some companies are great at doing the recruitment thing and having that very impactful strategy, but then they fall short to the actual onboarding orientation. In my book, I cover that next phase of employees, which I'm assuming a lot of your current employees must fall under. Once they're fully trained, they're fully onboarded. Now let's talk about how we continue to ensure that we're investing in their development, in their engagement. So could you share with the audience some of the practices that Oddball has implemented to ensure that you're continuously nurturing that seed of loyalty, but also ways that you're helping people feel seen, heard, and valued? You reference Slack early on to keep them connected, which is absolutely important, and understanding the importance of having different channels that might not be work related, but still feed and fuel their need for connection and for understanding their teammates. Let's talk about a few other practices that you guys have uncovered.
Absolutely. And I think we're doing something right around this too. We have a 90% retention rate, which is very high. Yeah. So some things that we do, I already mentioned Slack. We also have a tool called Bonusly, which is a web-based peer recognition system. And what that does is that we give a pool of points each month to people that they can use to recognize their peers. So it takes the leadership out of the equation altogether. And it will give the person points, and you can give it to people on your team, people that are not on your team, however you like. The only catch is you have to associate one of our 5 core values. Again, driving home those core values. And that's really not much of a catch at all, because you can associate a lot of things to those core values. And here's the key, though. Those aren't just, how several things that have been gamified just give out points and the points don't do anything. Yeah, these points can actually be turned into gift cards at all kinds of different places. So Bonusly, again, they have a very large rewards catalog, a gift card catalog that can be, so you can turn your points into all kinds of different stuff. And what I always tell people is that there are places you're shopping at today, because I always hate it when someone gives you a gift card in this place you never go to. So there are places that you're shopping at today. I'm positive of that. I don't want to necessarily say any of the big names, but there are big name stores that I guarantee people are shopping at.
So it incentivizes them to offer that peer-to-peer, that recognizing and helping other teams, acknowledging, I guess, the efforts and the contributions of other teams, but still, again, embedding that notion of how some of the successes have aligned with, or the contributions have aligned with, your 5 core values, which is another challenging piece. Too many organizations will develop these core principles, these values, this mission, this vision, have them posted on a wall and never revisit them. These specific practices, what I really appreciate about what you're sharing, are very specific ways to embed them into the day-to-day operations, so that people understand that this isn't just writing on the wall. This isn't just something we revisit every 5 years. This is something we live and breathe on the daily. So thank you for sharing that. What other different practices do you have in terms of, so we've covered rewards and recognition. Let's talk a bit more about just training and development in general. How are people supported in continuously evolving and growing their skill set?
Yeah. So first of all, I agree with you 100%. I too have seen many companies that have core values and they have them written on a wall and that's it. You never really see them go any further. And like I said, we talk about ours at every all hands. We have them in Bonusly. We evaluate based on them. So they do mean something and we use them to drive the company. In terms of additional support, we offer a professional development plan to help those develop. That can be used for certification classes. It can be used for just regular training classes. We also do internal lunch and learns, and those lunch and learns too can be on business related things. Like we're going to do one on expense reporting and finances. We've done some on government contracting 101 because several of our employees are new to that. But then we've done some that are fun ones that are not work related. Like one of our employees spent time on the Appalachian Trail, and she did a whole thing on how to live and backpack and survive on the trail. She did the whole thing. So it was very detailed.
I love that. And I love that it's an employee who organized it. So it's a win-win in that it's a developmental opportunity for that employee to be able to prep that presentation. And then if it's her peers, then it also shows the peers that they have the ability down the line, if they want to identify and share with their peers something they've done or teach them or educate them on something, then that's actually an opportunity too, right?
I'll give you another good one. One of our employees, Ian, is, I mentioned earlier that we have a foodie Slack channel. So Ian's kind of one of our residential foodie guys. Okay. And he'll post pictures of things he's cooked and they're very amazing. Unfortunately, he lives on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. I never seem to get over there to try any. But he did a lunch and learn on cookings, and he had a whole setup. He had this camera set up over his stove, so you could see that. He had a camera set up by his cutting board, and he was switching back and forth between cameras, and it looked very professional, very Gordon Ramsay going on.
Oh yeah, cooking show in the making.
Yeah,
I love it. So in terms of being able to continuously maintain and nurture all things engagement, can you share with us a bit some of the practices that you do to continuously take the pulse and measure how people are feeling? That 90% retention rate is absolutely impressive, not something we see a lot of. But I would be curious to know, one of our clients we worked with, they had some pretty decent retention rates. However, when asked whether they were doing any, further prodding in terms of state interviews. So those are interviews for people who've been around a certain period of time, asking them why they're still here and what they can continue to do, what they'd like to see more of, and just taking that exercise in order to gather that continuous improvement data to be able to, again, just maintain an overall healthy culture. They realized really quickly that people were there, they were sticking around, but they weren't very happy. So they were essentially what I refer to tenants of the workplace. They were there occupying realty, absolutely. They were performing to the minimum standards, but they were only tapping a fraction of what their true potential was. So in doing those stay exercises, those stay interviews, they realized really quickly that, okay, we've got room for improvement here and we've got opportunities that remain untapped. So let's start to work on those and develop initiatives to address some of the gaps that we've identified through those types of exercises, the same types of gaps that we'll identify through engagement survey exercises, for example. So can you share a bit more insight in terms of how you guys continuously gather that continuous improvement information and data, but then how you also action it?
Yeah, it's a great point because especially in the IT arena, we all have a choice. If you don't like a job, you have a choice whether you want to stay there or not. And I understand certainly in some industries, maybe it's a little bit more challenging to get a job than others, but in IT, it's typically not that hard. So people have a choice and we recognize that. And that's part of the reason that we want to make it appealing for people to stay. And I think we've done a very good job at that. So some of the things that we do is everyone has a one-on-one with their manager on a regular basis. And they get an opportunity during that one-on-one to voice concerns. Their manager can bring that up the chain if necessary. They can bring it to their program manager. They can reach out to leadership directly if necessary. We have a pretty flat organization. I always tell people you can always reach me on Slack. I say I may not respond right away, but I will respond. And I usually respond within 24 hours, which surprises some people. But then we also are back to our recruiting team. The team that originally brought them in, our recruiting and HR team, is always open to hearing from employees about any concerns or anything. And then they can bring it forward as well. And they can bring it forward anonymously or not.
Okay, that's my other question. So they do have a platform for pushing anonymous kind of feedback through to make sure that it is candid, genuine, authentic, and that they don't feel like there's... But I mean, typically, if you've got a healthy, thriving culture that encourages people to speak up and walks the talk and models the behavior they seek by providing continuous, transparent feedback, people are comfortable sending that feedback upwards and being able to have those conversations of where there might be room to continue to grow as an organization. While if there's a more negative culture, that's where you're going to want to make sure that you're providing those more neutral, objective, anonymous channels because they might not be comfortable doing it elsewhere.
Well, we also try to be fairly transparent. Obviously, we can't be transparent about everything. It is a company and there are certain things that can't be shared. But I feel like we're more transparent than most other companies I've been at. We share things like revenue projections and forecast and high-level business strategy. And we have a monthly all-hands meeting where we talk about some of that. Once a quarter, we go over the direction and the goals for the next quarter and the year. But the other thing we do in every all hands is we have a forum. And what that means is it's an open Q&A session, and it's a semi-anonymous. I say semi-anonymous because we have people input questions into a Google form, and depending on if they put it in before the meeting or during the meeting. If they do it during the meeting, you may see who's typing. If they do it before the meeting, you may not. So that's semi-anonymous, but those questions will come up, and then we will answer them right there in the meeting. Occasionally, there may be something we need to say we'll get back to you on, and we'll do that. And when we get back to them, we get back in our general Slack channel so everyone can see it. We also do an employee survey at least once a year where people can provide feedback, and there are tons of different questions that we get asked to take pulse on things. By and large, feedback is good. There's always areas for improvement, but by and large, our feedback has been good, and we try to take action on that.
Amazing. That's the other piece, right? When we work with companies at implementing the employee engagement surveys, the most crucial piece is to take that once you've done your compilation analysis, and we usually will provide like visuals and actual dashboards to the companies to share with their employees. This is how we tell them, this is what we heard, which is super important because they took the time to complete the survey. So you need to relay back to them, this is what we heard. But the most important piece is we normally will make recommendations based on what we've seen. And then we tell the company to pick, 2 to 3 of these things and prioritize them and relay that of everything we've heard, we feel like these are the 3 most important. And perhaps we're having focus groups ahead of time on in maybe the top 10 themes or this. We need to hone this down because realistically, we're going to be at 10% if we're trying to implement 10 initiatives, right? If from 100%, but if we can pick 3 and focus on them and develop action plans to actually do something about them and relay those action plans to answer that ever important question of this is what we're doing about it to your team members, then you're going to see your response rates to future exercises go through the roof. You're going to see people feeling that much more engaged because they know that when they take the time to provide that feedback, that they're actually doing something about it. It's not just sitting there. And because I've worked with organizations who have done engagement surveys, and when we start with clients, we'll say, let's talk about some of the previous engagement surveys that you've done. And I've had healthcare clients where I asked them, when was your last engagement survey or employee satisfaction pulse, whatever you want to call it. They're like, well, we aim to do them every 3 years. Every 3 years, and they're a healthcare organization who have just been through the whole global crisis of the pandemic, right. And you're only going to check in every 3 years? If I have to wait 3 years to tell someone how I really feel, I feel like that'll be quite diluted and a waste of my time, right? So we encourage them to at least do them annually. And then in between to do these pulse checks, these ENPS, the Employee Net Promoter Score. It's a 1-question survey. How likely are you to recommend this place of employment to someone you care about, right? And I always have to add the caveat: it's not that family member that you know is your enemy and you want to give them the worst place to work. Like you gotta you gotta add some context because people will question it, and then adding that the open-ended question saying, please provide further insight why you rated it the way that you did. And it's a really quick, anyone could Google ENPS score, Employee Net Promoter Score, how to calculate it. The formula's out there. And it'll give you an insight in terms of how many people within your organization are actually detractors. So they're telling people, run the other way. Do not apply here, because that can be extremely detrimental to a company's ability to recruit the talent they need, right? They're saying bad things about your company. It will also tell you who your neutrals are. So those are your passives that are neither telling people to apply, nor are they champions and cheerleaders of your organization. It'll also tell you what percentage are actually promoters. And in that, you can be a lot more strategic on where you focus your effort in terms of trying to either, the detractors are likely always going to be detractors. And when we're training organizations on how to do ENPS, we ask them, who do you think you focus your resources on first? They always say the detractors. And I say, no, the detractors are likely always going to be detractors. You actually focus your efforts first on your promoters, train them on how to get buy-in and how to become cheerleaders of the different initiatives so they can persuade your passives to become promoters, right? And that's how it happens, by helping them share. Anyways, so it sounds like Oddball is definitely taking the time to gather the information they need to continuously improve and measure. The last thing I'd like to talk about is exits. But then if you've got 90% retention, I'm suspecting you don't have that many. But are there practices that you've uncovered during exit that you find enable you to continue it, like gather information to be able to, again, infuse into future initiatives to improve on the employee experience?
Yes, we do an exit review with everyone who leaves, an exit interview with everyone who's leaving. And sometimes those are helpful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes people don't have a lot to say. It's odd because you figure if someone's leaving, that's their time to spill the beans. By and large, people are just leaving because they found a better opportunity that they felt was better for them and their family. It's usually not anything with malice. And kind of to that point, what you were just talking about earlier with referrals. So we have a very strong referral program where at last count, more than 20% of our employees came through referrals. And not just that, but we have people who leave the company and still refer people to the company. So people by and large leave on good terms, and we prefer them to leave on good terms. And like I said, it's usually for an opportunity that they believe to be better for their career. We've also seen some bounce back where people have left and either apply later or try to come back. And depending on the opportunity that we have available at the time, we'll take them back. So the grass isn't always greener, but we don't begrudge people if they leave and they believe that they're making the right decision for them. That's everyone has that choice.
Absolutely. My only insight there would be to ensure, for those out there thinking of implementing exit interviews or who are already doing exit interviews, make sure that you multiply the formats available for that exit interview to feed some of that, feedback, to send some of the feedback upwards. Have it an anonymous type survey-ish deal where some people need to crystallize. They're going to choke if you have them one-on-one in a meeting, in an interview type setting. Give them an opportunity to maybe crystallize, think about it, and then send them a bit of an evaluation, maybe a week after they've had time to kind of solidify. Have a number of options just so that you're speaking to every style and making sure that you're providing avenues for them to be as authentic and as genuine as possible in their feedback, so that it is, in fact, being valuable and providing the insights you need to continuously improve and evolve as a company. Thank you, Greg. I think we are officially at time. I want to thank you for coming on the show. And as I ask all of my guests towards the end of the show, if there was one final nugget of wisdom that you could offer our audience in terms of how to create that highly thriving workplace culture, what would that be?
In my opinion, it kind of all boils down to the golden rule: treat people how you want to be treated. Yes, it's a business. Yes, it's a company. You're there most of us are there to make money and grow the company. But at the end of the day, people are people. People are your greatest asset, and treat them how you'd want to be treated.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And also, we want to grow the company, we want to grow the business,
Exactly.
but understand that if you're not paying attention to all of these other pieces, to the people systems, the people infrastructure, and the actual people, then you are in fact working against that bottom line. You are in fact, it's costing you money, whether you're ready to acknowledge it or not. I use the figure of a checked out employee, a disengaged employee is costing you 34% on average at latest figures of their annual salary in lost production, revenue, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, that's amazing.
And you're still paying them their full salary. So that's a deficit right there, that 34%. So pay attention to these things, take the time to measure how people are feeling, and then take the time to do something about it and to continuously improve and evolve. If people want to continue connecting with you, Greg, how can they do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find Oddball at oddball.io. That's oddball.io, not .com. And we would love to connect.
Wonderful. And I'm assuming that you have a careers website on there as well.
Absolutely. So on the website.
If they've gotten excited at everything you've shared and they would love to apply and see what kind of opportunities might be available, check out the website and apply. We'll have all of those links, all of the relevant links in the show notes. As I say, every single episode, folks, of all the wonderful insights and all of the amazing tips and strategies that were shared today, the best practices, I want you to choose just one, at least one. If you want to choose three, but choose at least one and then make a plan to put it into action today. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guests, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.